You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show. To host Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you all the news from the local area and around the world. One of our aims is to increase participation and awareness of sport, and also we have a segment where we speak to some of the world's leading people in the field of psychology who've been kind enough to come on board the show and talk about their research and their ideas. And on this show we interview some of the world's best athletes, sports people, footballers, people who work in the game of football and different sports, and we get some really fascinating guests. They've got a really fascinating guest who's going to give us an insight into his career, a fantastic career, and playing at the highest level. And it's really interesting also to his perspective on what it was like to play against one of the world's greatest footballers, if not one of the world's greatest sports people of all time. It's going to be really interesting insight to see what he's got to say about that as well. So we have former Socceroos captain Paul Wade. Thanks for coming on board the show, Paul. Great to have you on board.
It's an absolute pleasure, good sir. An absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you on board. And I mean, you played over 100 games, or 100, for the Socceroos. You were the captain, and what an incredible career you had. But what sort of inspired you to go into football, Paul? For our listeners, what was your motivation to go into the game?
I just wanted some friends, because I grew up in the north of England in St Helens, big rugby league town, obviously. Yeah. And in the street that I lived in, they all played football, they all supported Liverpool, and if you didn't support Liverpool or play football, you had no mates.
Yeah.
So I was more than happy to join in, whether it be at school or on that little bit of... I Google Earthed where I lived in St Helens a couple of years ago, and I always remember the bit of patch of grass that we used to play football, and I measured it via Google Earth, and it was 7 metres by 7 metres.
Wow.
But for us, it was Wembley Stadium, and there was only 4 or 5 of us, but it was the only thing that was happening in the whole world. So that's what inspired me. Wanted to play for Liverpool. It wasn't the end of the world if I didn't, but the most important thing was that bit of turf on that day at that time with those mates.
Interesting you say, and that's something I'd like to pick up on later on in the show, in terms of sort of the generation that you grew up. And obviously there's people say these days things have changed in terms of young people getting out there and playing sport. And one of the aims of this show is to get people out there. Facilities are different now, and certainly different football clubs have got different facilities. I certainly want to talk about that on the show. But did you think at that point that you sort of reached the level you did? I mean, what an incredible career you had, and I mean, in your own mind, Paul, do you think you'd go on and be, the captain of the Socceroos? And at what point do you think, well, this is a possibility that I can play international football?
I never actually ever thought that until I got sent onto the ground. There was a player in the middle of the park. We were playing Czechoslovakia, as they were back then, and he got hurt and I went on. But right up until that moment, I never thought I'd be an international footballer. To me, it wasn't the most important thing. As I said, the most important thing was that training session and then that game. I never got caught up in, you've got to be at this level to be at that level to have a career in this. I feel sorry for the kids nowadays. If you're not on that career path at that age, you're not going to make it. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm glad they didn't tell me that, because I was 23 the first time I represented anyone.
Wow.
And that was the national team.
That's interesting stuff, powerful stuff. And I think there is a case there for certainly, young people going out there and enjoying the game and see where the road takes them, first and foremost. The sort of pressure on them at a young age to be can obviously be a difficult thing, but we all handle it different. And I mentioned earlier before, and we had the passing of Maradona recently, the player that you've played against, Paul. What a phenomenal player he was. And tell us about your experience. I mean, you planning, I suppose, at that point, did it kind of, you sort of take things in your stride, Paul, but to play against Maradona is something altogether, really. I mean, what you're forced to play against, one of the greatest, if not greatest footballers of all time.
Well, the first time he turned up in the country, news story started off with him. There might have been political riots happening. Anything could have been happening. There could have been earthquakes. There could have been volcanoes. But every news item started with Diego Maradona, even to the point where just training without his boots done up. It was just mayhem. We've never ever seen this sort of thing before. So in the build up to the game for that week beforehand, I'm starting to think, wow, I could be marking him, because there were two options. If he played up front, another player would have been marking him, but if he played in midfield, it was going to be me. So when we found out it was going to be that, the coach said, wow, if I want you to follow him all over the ground. If he goes to the toilet, I want you to go with him. It was just, and you don't find that very much. Even back in the day, in 1993, you didn't find that you'd play one player on another, because it's all about the team. You know, you've got to have a balance between marking somebody and covering space. So, wow, what a shock. And then I remember standing in the Sydney Football Stadium tunnel, and we were already there, and I'm looking at the crowd, and we're getting ready to go out, and then you could hear the studs of the Argentina players coming down, and this little bloke was standing right next to me, and I thought, without looking at him, I thought, gee, Diego Maradona is standing right next to me. I can't believe it. And I'm just standing there, and I thought, no, just wish him a happy birthday. So I turned to him and I wished him a happy birthday, because it was his birthday.
Wow.
Well, I didn't linger on the look that he gave me, but I can imagine it was, you are kidding me.
Wow.
Something along those lines. But for the next 180 minutes, I followed him all over the ground. All I saw was the number 10. I didn't see his face because he was always running away from me. But so strong. I mean, I could jump, but even at his height, he could. Wow, he got at least 2 feet above anything I challenged for. So strong. Didn't use his right foot. He used every part of his left. But wow, I'm thinking to myself, a couple of times I just stopped. I actually pushed him over in the first, 5 or 10 minutes. And I apologised when he was getting up. I apologised. Well, I didn't say sorry. My hand gesture was, oh, sorry, mate. Sorry. And I wasn't in awe of him, but I was thinking, what an honour to play against somebody like him, having grown up in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne.
And the thing is too, you know, for our listeners, Paul, I mean, they were obviously World Cup qualification to get to the World Cup. I mean, it wasn't just a friendly, so to speak. It was a lot riding on the game, and I think Argentina had called him back because their qualification sort of didn't go to plan. And is that the case where it was obviously a huge, riding on the game really, in terms of it wasn't just sort of exhibition game. It was a crucial game, huge game.
Yeah, look, they got smashed. I think it was by Colombia in the World Cup qualifier before. So their fans were saying, "You bring back Maradona. You've got to bring him back. We're in real trouble here."
Yeah.
So when they turned up here, they were under a lot of pressure, but they had Diego Maradona, so they were feeling very, very comfortable.
Yeah.
A lot of us were part-time footballers, but this was the real deal. I'm glad it wasn't the Diego Maradona of 1986. It certainly wasn't that. Because you're right, he'd just come back from a drug suspension.
Yeah.
But it was an amazing moment for not just for me, but for the whole country to have somebody like him standing on our shores and showing us flashes of what he used to do. And just recently, since his death, I've actually pulled out all the vision. There are hours and hours and hours of it, and the number of players that tried to kick him while he was running, and he was not only playing against players, but playing against the surface, the ball bobbling up and down.
Wow.
You think, wow, that is that. The carpets they play on today.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, good on you, mate. Well done. You try doing it when Diego Maradona did it on the surfaces that he did it, and then we'll start to rate you as one of the best.
Absolutely, it's a great point. I think that's one thing that's sort of come out, in terms of comparisons, and I think it's hard to compare anyway for generations. But like he says, I mean, the treatment he would get as a player, and obviously, I think the thing is too, the certainly at sort of club level, the players he had around him weren't the sort of players that. I mean, an obvious comparison has been, Messi, who's a great player in his own right. It's not taking anything away from him, but certainly the casting, the supporting act he's got at Barcelona is stronger than what Maradona had at Naples. That's for sure. But I mean, he strikes me as a player, Paul, that sort of is a big match play. He's up for the occasion. I mean, just to come back for your country after what he'd been through is huge. And did you guys sort of get a sense of his presence on the field when, did it make a difference, do you think, to sort of see at that point one of the all-time greats on the pitch for the Australian team?
Yeah, every time he got the ball, people were, I don't know, you just got this sense that he could make absolutely anything happen. And I can imagine being on an Argentina team with Diego Maradona. He doesn't have to touch every blade of grass on the ground, as far as physical fitness goes. Just give it to him and then watch him make passes that you didn't even see, never mind play.
Yeah.
So it was just, you could say, just a sense of reassurance. If we're under pressure, give it to Maradona. If we want to make something happen, give it to Maradona. And he didn't touch every blade on the ground on the grass. I just thought to myself, my job for years has been touching every blade of grass on the ground, and now all of a sudden I'm standing next to a guy who absolutely explodes when he gets it, and the rest of the time he's walking around. He's just looking for that one moment where I'm not concentrating. So it was, I would love to have been on a side with somebody like him, and I think a lot of teams have that player, that player who can not give the ball away and not panic and make something happen.
Absolutely. And I suppose in terms of, pushing them all the way, I mean, for our listeners and, who obviously there'll be, listeners, the show gets out there and people listen from all over the world. But, I mean, the Australian team run them close. Paul, he had the moments in the game. Obviously playing away in Argentina was going to be a big ask, but it was 1-1 in Australia, if my memory serves me correct, or?
It was. They scored. It's funny. Maradona. He got away from me. I tackled him. He got up. He won the ball back from one of our players, crossed it, and a player called Balbo headed it in on the near post. And so we were gutted until then, and then with a few minutes to go, we scored a goal. Well, the roof on the Sydney football stadium lifted. I mean, the noise was amazing. It really was. So, Eddie Thompson, who was a Scotsman, born in Scotland, had this hard work ethic, and I'm sure that's why I was the Socceroo captain, because that's all I did. Honestly, all I did was work hard. So his philosophy playing against Argentina at home was, we'll be in comfortable position, like we'll know the training grounds, we'll know the hotel, the food, we'll get a result here, and then we'll go to Argentina, and if we have got a result, they'll be under so much pressure to beat us. And that's what happened. We got there. In fact, the president said, if Australia beat us tomorrow, there'll be a national day of mourning.
Wow.
And that's how much pressure they were under. And they had Batistuta, and Maradona, and they had world-class players.
Absolutely.
And I don't know whether they felt pressure, but this was a World Cup qualifier. They're supposed to win it, never mind just get to it.
Absolutely.
So, a lot of pressure.
Yeah,
especially when I scored, but I was offside by half a yard.
Wow.
I'll tell you what a miserable linesman. What a miserable linesman.
Yeah.
But the noise, they beat us 1-0, and we scored the goal for them. Batistuta had a shot from close to the byline. It hit our defender's foot, went over the goalkeeper and into the back of the net. And again, the noise at the River Plate Stadium in a World Cup qualifier was something I don't think I've ever heard before. And the amount of paper that came out of those stands, how they tear the paper up, and they cascading down. You could almost not see the touchlines because the amount of paper that, an amazing result for us. Because just after that, somebody came up to, because after the game, the final whistle, some of the boys were in tears. But there was one Aussie flag on the other side of the ground.
Wow.
So we all went over there and we applauded the Aussie flag, but the whole stadium started applauding us, like as if we'd gone over there to congratulate them.
Wow.
We hadn't. We'd just gone over to celebrate this with this one Aussie flag instead of 80,000 Argentinians. So, and after the game, we went to a TV station, me and the assistant coach, and I was doing an interview, and via an interpreter, the host said, "So how much do you earn?" And I went, "What?" Anyway, well, I earned $5,000 a season because I was a part-time footballer. I was a draftsman. I was an air conditioning draftsman. So, but what he was the short story is, he was just trying to put it in perspective to all the viewers that they were almost knocked out of the World Cup by part-time footballers who earn $5,000 a season, not $50,000 a week.
Absolutely.
So it was amazing that people had that much respect for the job that we'd done. One all here in Sydney and losing 1-0 to an own goal over there. That's quite credible.
Absolutely, and putting it into context too, Paul, it was a team that had won the World Cup in 86 and 90, had reached a final, and for them to sort of miss out of 94, it would have been huge. I mean, the World Cup being in America at the time, and obviously they went into the World Cup as well, and maybe they didn't perform as well as they wanted to, but it would have been a huge story for them. But I suppose in your own career, I mean, from there, it's many highlights, and I suppose different games have different highlights, but no doubt that'll be one of the biggest highlights. But what would you say, how did, after playing that qualification, Paul, in terms of, what was it like for you afterwards? I mean, was it surreal? And obviously you seem to be quite level-headed bloke and quite a humble person. In terms of your own career, where did it sort of go from there in terms of your own highlights moving forward?
Well, that was in 93. I retired in 96. So the highlights there weren't as great. I retired in a World Cup qualifier just before we played the fatal Iran game. We were 2-0 up going into the final leg at home, and we drew 2-2. Because they scored 2 away goals, they qualified for the next phase to try and get to the World Cup. So I missed that, thankfully. So that was my highlight. But after that, you know what? Rather than feeling flat, I was buzzing.
Yeah.
For years and years, I was living off the high of that. Not because it was Maradona, but because of the importance of the game and the occasion.
Yeah.
It seems like when you play at a certain level and then you drop back to a lower level, everything seems a little bit more easy. I'm sure a lot of players who played for their country go back to play for their club, and the game seems a little bit slower. Well, after playing against Maradona, everything seemed in slow motion. I didn't feel as if I couldn't do anything. So it was, it was. But my body was killing me. I was taking anti-inflammatories like they were going out of fashion.
Wow.
And the biggest problem in my life was me and my body.
Yeah. No, I mean, in terms of your own career, Paul, I mean, aside from obviously the Argentina game, what were some of the even sort of prior to that, what were some of the highlights for you in terms of international and even sort of domestic football? What would you say some of the things that you look back on and think, yeah?
Oh, let's see. I've won. We play grand finals over here. Yeah, it's important to win the league. But to win the grand final is what you'd be remembered for. So basically, if everyone plays everybody twice, the top, however many teams, say the top 4 teams, play off against each other, and the 2 top teams play in the final. and the winner is crowned champions. So it happens in all sports in Australia, and we just accept it. It's becoming in the last decade, it's become important to win the league, but it'll never be as important as winning the grand final. So I've won 2 of them, and on both occasions, the team I've won both of them, but both of those occasions we scored in the last 5 minutes.
Wow!
And if you've ever played in an FA Cup final, for example, scoring a goal in the last 5 minutes of an FA Cup final to win it, you can imagine their highlights, their memories that last for. I don't remember the night after because that became a bit of a blur. I remember the morning after because that was really painful.
Yeah.
It's just simple things, that everybody, doesn't matter whether you're an international footballer, it feels the same. Whether you're playing on Sunday morning in the park or whatever, it feels exactly the same. There is no difference.
No, it's interesting you're saying. And in terms of yourself, Paul, I mean, the players around you, you mentioned the sort of Argentine qualification game. After that, we sort of see a number of Australian players heading to Europe and playing in the Premier League. Things have sort of changed now. It's sort of interesting to see what your opinion in terms of where the game is going in Australia at the moment. We sort of see, 98, after 98, 206, the kind of peak in terms of players playing all around Europe. And you would have seen some of those players young and coming through. What did you make of all that, Paul? Sort of that generation of Australian players that sort of came through and were really competitive on a world stage, or playing with some of the biggest teams in Europe around the world. And there was at one point you kind of thought, well, here we go. This could be a transitional period for the game in Australia where, they were very competitive against some of the world's best teams at that point. What was the sort of state of the game at that point for you, Paul? What did you make of it, sort of seeing some of these players playing in Europe and the competitiveness of the team and, some of the huge household names that were being produced and coming through?
Yeah. We tried 30 years to try and qualify for a World Cup, and we'd never done it. And we knew we had good players because they were all playing at the highest level. I don't know how many of those 2006 squad were playing in England, but there were a few of them. And we had some really high-profile players like Mark Viduka and Harry Kuehl, Mark Schwarzer, and so Lucas Neal. So names that people in that era would be very familiar with. But they all came out of a system where we had an institute of sport in our capital, Canberra, and that's where all the very best players, young players, got to train. They went to school, but they trained almost 24 hours. It was all based around football. It was fun, and they tried to make it. Remembering these kids were only 15, 16 years of age, and they were leaving home. But it was based around not just being able to control a ball, but physically. It was all about psychological. It was just everything that you needed to be a footballer in a professional area where you weren't distracted by girls and alcohol. They weren't priests, but they weren't devils either. So it was a perfect environment. And from that, they eventually, on their own, went off and did their thing at the highest level. So, but the grounding was at this Institute of Sport. Well, they've got rid of that Institute of Sport now because the game is a little bit more professional over here, that each club has an academy. And so it's not the best players playing with the best players all the time at that age group. Do you know what I mean? It's great to have a big pool of players that they're not being tested against each other all the time. The worst thing is, and I guess it's the same in England, is they're going to go and buy a player before having the patience to wait for one to come through their youth system. We looked at our youth teams, our young Socceroos, our Joeys we call them, our youth team. And some of the players playing against Brazil in the under-19s had played 5 minutes in the A-League.
Wow.
Which is, it's just a joke.
Yeah.
And the now coach, Graham Arnold, He's coaching both the Olympic team and the national team. He was saying that when he had these youth team players, that they had no idea. They weren't strong enough. They weren't psychologically strong enough either, because they'd not been tested, because a coach can't afford to lose his job. So he'd rather spend money on buying a great player who can do so.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, the thing that sort of, I wonder, Paul, it's like, I mean, I know it's a cliche, and the young people these days, and, they are what they are. I mean, in terms of the way the system sort of has evolved and changed, for good reason, I think a lot of the things, obviously, it's a different, obviously, education system, the footballing environment's different. There's many positives, but in saying that, what I think from my point of view is the mental strength that your sort of generation had. I mean, there's you guys, and you mentioned there playing semi-pro, you got a job, but then you're turning up against in these huge games and giving it everything and sort of putting it out there. I'm not saying the young people these days don't do that, but it seems to me that mentally maybe things have sort of changed, and that's sort of spilled on the pitch. I mean, you obviously work with young people as well, Paul. Is there something in that, do you think, in terms of maybe sort of the environment they're in now has sort of changed, and that sort of mental strength is sort of not like it used to be?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I feel for kids today, or young people, in fact, everybody. The amount of pressure that they're under to achieve results at any one given time. We were under pressure, but it was the pressure that we created for ourselves. We never felt pressure from, hey, if you don't win this game, you're going to have to move countries, or you're going to have to move cities, or you're going to have to get a real job. We already had real jobs, so we were gutted. If we got dropped, if we lost a game, if we lost a league, but it wasn't the end of the world. And I think with all these people today, it's not just that 90 minutes of football where the crowd give you a hard time and they boo and they throw things, and there's an article in the paper the next day. Mm-hmm. There are articles in the paper every day. They are on TV, they are on the internet, everyone's got an opinion, and if they get caught up in that, believing what they're reading and hearing, then they must be, I don't know how they do it. I really don't. People say they're not as resilient as they were. Well, I'd like to see us be as resilient as they have to be today. There is no way in the world. Our resilience was, I've hurt my knee. Get out there. Back in the day, it was get out there and play. We'll sort your knee out after the final whistle. Yeah. My dad I used to say to my dad, for example, I said, Dad, I've got a sore leg, or I've got a sore hand, or whatever, and he'd sit there and go, I've got a bone in my leg. And I'm thinking, I've got a bone in my leg. In other words, shut up, get on with it.
Absolutely,
that was our resilience. Look, honestly, we took it out into games. There is no doubt we were mentally tough, very, very strong. But the consequences of not being weren't as great as they are today.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Well, great observation. And I think on top of that, these days, as well as having the media, you've got social media too, and everyone's sort of an expert in their own way. And and everyone's, I suppose, they're entitled to their opinion. I mean, obviously, as long as it's above board, and they're sort of, where I think it's wrong is when it gets derogatory and they sort of cross that line, and the youngsters are doing the best they can, and the situation is what it is, and schools obviously changed a lot, and back in the day, obviously, it's changed for good reason. Obviously, the punishment stuff that used to go on at schools back in the day wasn't great. I think that I'm not advocating all that sort of stuff. I think obviously you want to give an environment to flourish, but now we've got a new world, Paul. It's sort of the social media. And yourself, you work with young people. Does that affect them? Do you think sort of being out there on sort of, it can be a good thing, I suppose, to a point, but on the other side of things, if you can't handle that, it can be a pressure cooker, really, if you're sort of being scrutinised by everybody. Not just playing a bad game, but just life in general.
Yeah. Oh, look. Yeah. I don't know whether it's happening over there, but we just had a presenter, TV presenter, and she's just about had enough. Her family were being threatened. I mean, she just did the news, right? I don't know what she said,
wow.
but people have, these trolls have got on there and threatened her and her family and all sorts of things, and it really destroyed her. And she thought, you know what, enough's enough. Let's not talk about getting our kids being more resilient. Let's start punishing the people who are doing these things. Well, it's gone to the government level, and now these social media platforms are being told, if you either take this stuff down straight away, or you're going to be fined millions and millions of dollars. So it's fighting it from a different angle now, and thankfully, because I've often thought with the work I do with young people, is make them stronger. Because there's always going to be thieves, there's always going to be murderers, there's always going to be trolls. So that was the way I was looking at it, and I thought, what a great... She wasn't brave, she was just sensible. It makes sense.
Absolutely,
Punish the people that are doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you do that in the corporate world, you go to jail.
Absolutely.
Well, send these people to jail as well, and let's see how many of them jump on the internet now.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I think that there certainly has to be tighter regulations and restrictions, and I think there is a sort of fine line, and obviously people are entitled to their opinion. Someone doesn't play well if it's sort of kept above board, but there's a sort of line, I think, that, and I suppose in one sense, Paul, it is probably just an undercurrent. I think the majority of people do use these things sensibly, but it doesn't help if someone's going through a hard time as well, and it all adds up really, and we sort of see, the research suggests that it's certainly not a good thing, for them to be under that sort of under that sort of pressure. And I suppose the other side of things too, people say, well, why don't they sort of come off? But they shouldn't have to. I mean, in the day, they're in their right to go on there and sort of as a communication medium. But in terms of the Australian game, just sort of out of interest, Paul, sort of where do you see it going from? I know, it's an opinion and people have different opinions, but where do you see it from here? I mean, you got the A-League, and yourself, you probably look at the A-League and then, okay, you mentioned there the academies, and can they sort of start producing the players to compete like, say, your generation, like, 206, maybe 2010, and at the moment we're sort of seeing maybe, the team, there's still some good players coming through, and there's no doubt about that, but the reality is you kind of think, well, 206 is a chance to kick on here and sort of compete regularly against the bigger nations. Where do you see it going from your opinion, Paul?
Gee whiz. It's like everything. It comes in fits and starts, doesn't it? You go, wow, where did we get all these players from? And then for the next 16 years, you go, where have they all gone?
Yeah.
Why are we not producing more? So we're going through this thing at the moment where, are we doing the right thing by the kids? Are we giving them the career pathways that they need to get to where they've got to make us, world champions? Let's not. We all want to be world champions, don't we? Whether we do it or not, it's a different thing. But at least we all want to be there, and we want our kids to do that. And it's really difficult because we're always going to be producing good kids, but are we going to be producing enough of them? That's the biggest problem. So we have qualified for the last 4 World Cups, which is great. We go through Asia now. We don't have to play the 5th best team in South America anymore, like Uruguay and Argentina. But it is tough. Where are we at the moment? We're sort of caught in no man's land. We've got great players, but we haven't got enough great players. It's always going to be a problem for us getting them back to play for our country because we're so far away. And they're playing all over the world. Back before, it used to be most of them were playing in Europe. Well, now they're playing in China, and they're playing in Southeast Asia. They're playing wherever, the Middle East. They're all chasing the money, and you can't blame them. But they're coming from such diverse backgrounds that you can imagine Graham Arnold, the national team coach, he's got to bring them all together to play the same style of football. The mentality is always the same. They're always going to be Australians. They're always going to be resilient and tough. But their mindset in a football sense is completely different. And that hasn't changed from 2006 to now, but it just, I don't know, because everyone's getting better, it puts even more pressure on coaches to come up with ways of getting them, because I don't know whether people know this, but you can only get your players a certain number of days before a game. It's not as if you can say to clubs on the other side of the world, we got a World Cup qualifier coming up and we need your player for 2 weeks. You can't do that. The clubs can let them go only 5 days before a World Cup qualifier. So it's tough on everyone, coaches, development squads, players. But the short answer is, I don't know where we're at. I know it's a sad thing to come up with, but I really don't know. And the great thing is, neither does anybody else.
Yeah, that's a really refreshingly honest point, Paul, because I think a lot of people sort of, you know, I'm not a lot of people, there are people out there that they all have an opinion, and fair enough, but I think these things are more complex than you know, it's sort of multifactorial. It's probably not one thing, it's a combination of things really. But on the other side of things, it takes one player to come through, and that has a massive knock-on effect for everybody else. And you know, one player, you know, comes through, like you mentioned before, a Viduka, Kuhl, a Cahill even comes through the ranks, and that kind of inspires a generation to think, well, actually, we'll sort of see what we can do. But the work that you do is quite interesting. You work with the young people too, Paul. I mean, yourself, you're sort of, you know, well placed to do that. You've played sport at the highest level. You sort of, you know, almost like metaphorically played against one of the greatest footballers of all time. And you know, there's a lot had been said about his sort of career on and off the field, and you know, it's one of them really. I think it's a difficult one. I sort of, you know, it is what it is. It's you know, life is what it is, to be fair. But in one sense, what's the work that you do with the young people, just for our listeners, Paul? What do you do in terms of helping them to be the best they can be, or the sort of work that you do with them?
Well, I basically use all my football experiences, including marking Diego Maradona, and my health experiences, because I've had part of my brain removed. I was living with epilepsy all my life. Yeah. Although for the major part of my life, I didn't know I had epilepsy. I was having seizures, but they were only mild seizures. And so I use those experiences, and the ones that I'm going through now, because it doesn't stop, does it? You come to a point in your life and there's always a new challenge. And the challenge I face at the moment, and I've known this for a long time, is that, you know, the next Paul Wade is going to come along, and the next Paul Wade is going to be good on the radio, and the next Paul Wade is going to be good on the TV, or being a corporate speaker like I do. So I got to a stage where I was on working in the media, and then I knew it was sort of you get less and less gigs. So I thought to myself, what am I going to do now? Because you've got to reinvent yourself all the time. And then I found all the football shirts that I've swapped from all over the world over the years, and every one of those shirts has a story. So now I use that football shirt like Maradona's, and I hold those shirts up in front of these kids and tell real stories and show them that, hey, I grew up in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne. I was born in the north of England, and look what I did. And if they can actually see something like a football shirt, like I honestly can't remember which England shirt I swapped. No, I can't remember his name. Anyway, and I show that shirt, and my story is all about just dealing with the stress and pressure, that pressure of expectation. And with Maradona, it was something similar. And my brain operation, I had a seizure on Channel 7, one of the major TV stations in Australia, and I was interviewing Paul Ocon, the Socceroo captain, after they played France at the MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. So I'm interviewing him, and I had a seizure live on television, and nobody knew that I had epilepsy until that moment.
Wow.
And I figured that, well, I'm going to lose my job on the TV. Everyone's going to know. I'll be targeted for all sorts of reasons. And so just dealing with that. And it was amazing because people were wow, we didn't realise, what can we do to help you? And, now we know why you wanted a lift everywhere. We can pick you up, we can help you. And there's my story, my message to these kids. Just tell someone. You don't have to hide it. We've all got these serious problems. It's the only problem in the world. We've all got them. But you have to share it with somebody, because you won't be on your own. And from that, I've had part of my brain removed, as I say, the size of 2 matchboxes in my front temporal lobe. But again, I can tell stories, use vision, and say, look, I'm still here, and I'm still fighting, and it's so hard, and I'm faced with different challenges every single day, but I'm not going to give up, and neither are you.
That's powerful stuff, Paul. That certainly. I mean, I suppose like you mentioned there. Life has its inherited problems. Irrespective of what we do, sometimes we look at other people and think they've sort of not necessarily got it easy, but it's easy to sort of dismiss other people who are going through stuff as well, and that's a huge thing. And what's their response when you speak to them, the young people, Paul? Just sort of out of curiosity. I mean, yourself, you're Socceroo, you've been a captain, and they'll see you in the media, and obviously, how do they respond when they sort of hear you talk about the challenges you've had, like the operation and the things you've been through yourself?
It's an interesting point. People have often said, you know what, Paul, it's terrific, but they don't know who you are. They weren't even born when you were playing. In fact, Tim Cahill wasn't even born when you were playing. They don't know who he is either. And I keep thinking to myself, it's not about whether they know me or not now. It's about whether they'll know my story when I leave. They still probably won't remember my name, but they will remember the story. And I think that's the most frustrating thing, even now, is that, my ticket, free ticket to get in, is the fact that I'm Mark Maradona and had part of my brain removed. It doesn't matter who I am, really. It's the story behind it. So the great thing is that I really ran it back down these people, especially teachers, back down their throats. I mean, I work with the corporate sector as well, and they really appreciate it because they were around when I was playing, so they understood. They were there when it was all happening. But I love it when the last thing I say to the kids is that after all of these stories, today is the very first day of the rest of your life. And then I stop. And I just want them to remember that no matter what has happened yesterday, the day before, whatever you think might happen in the future, today is the very first day of the rest of your life. You take ownership of it now. This is your life. Don't let anybody else distract you from what you want to do. And so to see the look on somebody, if nobody says anything, then I'm winning. And usually nobody's saying anything by the time I'm finished, because I finish on my epilepsy story, and that's very, very powerful. So I walk away feeling, wow, I've told that story like I've said it for the first time, because I have to them. But for them, hopefully, they might not remember my name, but they'll remember there was a guy standing up there with a Maradona shirt and half his brain missing.
Wow, and that's powerful stuff. I mean, in terms of the epilepsy, Paul, you mentioned there that was there sort of, I know it's sort of difficult in terms of pinpointing, but was it something that you might have been aware of looking back on it early on, or I mean, in terms of at what point did you sort of realise something wasn't quite right in terms of that experience?
Well, right from as far back as I can remember, I always felt there was one particular time we just arrived in Australia in 1973, and I remember being down the bottom of the driveway. I don't know what I was doing. I was maybe putting bins out or something like that, and all of a sudden I'll never forget it because I remember feeling that way for the rest of my life until I had that brain operation. I felt sick, hot, dizzy, and lonely. And if you mix all those emotions up, it only lasted for 30 seconds. But if you mix all those emotions up, that's what I was experiencing. And that was me having a seizure. But I didn't know that. I thought that was the way my body was handling pressure. Maybe I was worried about what was going to happen at school, or I don't know, suck it up. Do you know what I mean? That's that never let them know you're hurt mentality. Just suck it up, deal with it. It happens to everybody. So I lived with it for years, and when I found out, when I collapsed right in front of a physiotherapist before we played Argentina over there, that was the first time anyone thought there was a problem.
Wow.
They said when you get back to Australia after you've finished with Maradona, you go and see a neurologist.
Yeah.
So they did all the tests on my brain when I got back to Australia, and there was a mark on my front temporal lobe, and they said, you've been having seizures all your life. And when my mum found out, she said, I remember you sitting on the couch and smacking your lips. And I remember you sitting there other times and staring into nothing. And no matter how many times we tried to tell you, you didn't respond. And if you look at the number of different seizures there are today, some of them are exactly that. I sit there, I smack my lips. I mean, I don't do it now because the brain surgery's worked.
Yeah.
But there's an absence. It's called an absence. And you all of a sudden disappear.
Wow.
See that silence was deafening? That's what it's like. You completely disappear. And when I got caught on TV interviewing the Socceroo captain, part of it was I was smacking my lips, and my voice became distorted. So there are many, and then I started having tonic-clonic seizures, which is where you fall over and you split your head up and you shake. It only lasts 4 or 5 minutes, but in that time, if you need to go to the toilet, that's where you go. It's the most humiliating thing. And I was taking 2 sets of clothes around with me just in case I had a tonic-clonic seizure, that I could just get changed into another set of clothes so I could carry on with my day and not be as embarrassed as I was. So, I'd been dealing with it all my life, but for the most part, I didn't know that I was having seizures, which just shows you, I wonder if I'd have known every time that was happening that I was having a seizure, would I have quit because I wasn't playing for St Helens when I was 10 years old, or when I wasn't playing for the Socceroos when I was 22 years old? That's right, because I've got epilepsy. I'm not clever at school because I've got epilepsy. Well, I'm glad I didn't know I had epilepsy, because I seem to have done all right.
Yeah, no, it's a powerful story, that, Paul. I suppose in one sense it's, from an awareness point of view, when you speak this in schools, and in another point of view, in terms of creating that awareness for people to... Do you have situations like people think, well, actually, I might have, something along them lines, and maybe get themselves checked out and sort of, get whatever. Obviously, for yourself, in terms of your own career, it kind of worked for you in that respect. But obviously, if someone's got epilepsy or has any sort of those symptoms, you'd sort of encourage them to sort of go see a medical person and get the treatment they need. Has it created any awareness in schools? People sort of actually said, what, I'm going to go get this checked out. It could be something that needs doing, or is that...
Yeah. We're always telling our kids, no matter what it is, whether you think it's you, or you're going to blame yourself or what, if you just tell someone, it's how powerful, just somebody knowing what you're feeling and thinking in itself will be such a relief, because nobody could solve my epilepsy. But when I collapsed in front of that physiotherapist before we played Argentina over there, because somebody else knew what I was feeling, I felt so liberated. Like I didn't have the weight of the world on my shoulders. So I'm always telling young people and older people, because I talk to corporates who are under just the same amount of pressure as kids are under today. Yeah. That level of expectation is absolutely ridiculous at times. That just tell someone. So yeah, when they go and they just knowing that they're not alone was so important for some people. Especially dealing with epilepsy, because you don't know when you're going to have a seizure. You don't know what kind of seizure you're going to have. Some epilepsy can't be solved. You know, we're talking medicinal cannabis at the moment. That's coming in Australia. But, you know, my medication wasn't working. I needed an operation. My daughter's got it, but hers is a chemical imbalance.
Wow.
So everybody will know somebody with epilepsy, but you won't know because they're not going to tell you because they're embarrassed. And we just got to try and get rid of that fear of somebody else knowing. And that just doesn't go for epilepsy. That goes for everything.
No, absolutely.
And I'm sure you've got programs over there that are encouraging people to just tell someone.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, like you mentioned there, it's obviously certain things affect different people in different ways, and certainly I think the fear would be for a lot of people could be that sort of that stigma around that in terms of okay, then what now, and in terms of like you says for yourself, or in the way not knowing, you sort of carry on your career and what do I do, but obviously you know things have changed over the years, and there is sort of treatment, which really recommend people do get the treatment they need for any condition, you know, whatever it is, really moving forward. But it must have been sort of I suppose a frightening time for yourself, Paul, when you weren't sure what was going on, and you were looking to get that, and a relief to get the sort of diagnosis to a point too.
Yeah, well, there were two moments in my life so far, because there's going to be more, guaranteed, that I was totally lost as to what I was going to do, because for the most part, you know when training is, you know what you've got to eat, you know who you're playing, you know how you're going to play against them, you know where your family are, but all of a sudden there comes a time where you don't know. And I think the most important thing is to realise that, I joke about this, it's my favourite line, change is inevitable except from vending machines. And I think if you can accept that, it helps you realise that yes, you've got to change. You don't have to go with the flow, furthest from the truth. You've got to stand and fight, but you've got to fight in a different way. You've got to reinvent, find something else you love. The two moments were when I got dropped in 2 World Cup qualifiers against Canada, and I'd played 88 times for the Socceroos, and I'd never been dropped. The only game I missed was because I was sick, and that was against Everton at Olympic Park in Melbourne. That was the only game I missed. And right before we played Canada over there, the coach said, I've tactically changed this, you're not playing. Now, you might think, well, you're playing for your country, it can't be that bad, you've done it 88 times. Well, for me, that was my world. That's what I knew. That was everything to me. And somebody has just told me that I'm not good enough. So it was that moment of not knowing whether I'd ever get back to playing for Australia again. Now, it was just a horrible time. And then a second game against Canada, World Cup qualifier in Sydney, he dropped me again. Now, I went through all sorts of things, like you get really... again, I hope I'm not taking too much of your time, but there are 4 rooms in life. Yeah. Contentment, where you don't have to choose. Yeah. Denial, where you refuse to choose. Confusion, where you don't know what to choose. And renewal, you choose, you set goals, you revisit those goals, you plan and you organise. And we all want to be in there, right? But you can be guaranteed that from there, if everything's going on all right with you all the time, you will be back in this room of contentment where you stop choosing and you stop changing So I just went through that whole process. Contentment. I played 88 times for the Socceroos. I'm always going to get selected. I went to a room of denial. You're told you're not good enough. You get angry. You blame everybody else. Then I'm in the room of confusion. I'm going, shit, he's dropped me. What am I going to do to get it back? And that confusion of finding out how I'm going to get, that's a story for another time, but how am I going to get my shirt back? And rather than getting angry in that room of denial and blaming everyone else, work it out as to how you're going to get that shirt back in the room of confusion. And I got my shirt back in the very next game, and that was against Argentina, 2 World Cup qualifiers. So I use those things about moments where you're lost and you have no direction. Think of those 4 rooms, put it in the real context: contentment, denial, confusion, renewal. Identify which room you're in and make sure it's not in the room of denial. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. That's really powerful stuff, Paul. Really interesting stuff. Certainly anyone listening, young or at any age, that's a huge, takeaway. That's for sure. And as we sort of draw into the end of the show, it's been fascinating, Paul. I've sort of enjoyed every second, speaking to you, and I'm sure our listeners have too. And it's just could have carried on speaking. We're sort of drawing to the close. I really want to thank you for coming on board the show. It's been really fascinating. No doubt our listeners have really enjoyed the hearing you speak, and it's been really, really powerful stuff. So thanks again, Paul. That was Paul Wade, former Socceroo, who now does speaking, inspires young people and people in the corporate sector. No doubt many people across all sort of walks of life with some sort of powerful insights. So thanks again, Paul. That was Paul Wade on the Friday Sports Show, Salford City Radio 94.5 FM, with your host Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you all the latest news from the local area and around the world.